officially took up his job as editor of The Observer, Hugh, I guess, decided that he should come and meet us in person. So he came unexpectedly to the Christmas party of The Observer staff, wearing his fringed buckskin jacket and a certain air of authority. And I think we all knew, by the time the party was over, that The Observer was on the edge of a new era. And people might have been a little nervous, but I think they were kind of excited too. As editor and publisher, Hugh was big picture all the way. He did many things. He changed us to a news magazine. He established a chain of writers across the country so that it really had a national voice coming from many places, and many of them are still writing for The Observer today. But he moved us, which was I guess you could say a little miracle, into the computer world. And this was not, I believe, because Hugh thought that he would love to write on a computer. I think he did it because he knew we had to do it. And I have to admit, I fought him every inch of the way. But finally, between us, we reached an accord and we became computer experts, although I believe, well, for our little thing, experts. But I believe Hugh always preferred his manual typewriter. He also strengthened editorial independence. He was a great believer in being able to say what he needed to say to the people who were reading that magazine. And I think probably the same with the Anglican journal. But it was his courageous reporting and his passionate writing that people will remember the longest. His reports out of Central America were ahead of their time, ahead of most secular publications. His concern for refugees around the world, his love of Africa. Whether he was off to China or Haiti or the Middle East, he would come back with all piles of little notebooks. They never seemed to be too wide, but a lot of writing jammed into them. And they had stories that he needed to tell. Soon he'd be writing long into the night, banging out these long, long articles. Long enough for books, literally. He'd been in desperate places, and he felt compelled to tell us what he'd seen. As it turns out, books were probably the best place for that, but the magazine benefited from his stories he brought us. For Hugh, journalism was always about advocacy, challenging people to change what they could change. The cause of Aboriginal rights in Canada was always on his mind and in his heart. Canada's deteriorating environmental situation troubled him, and we carried, almost 2 or 3 cover stories a year, I think, over that period, just a whole pile of them, on what was going on in many phases of it. You urged the church not to be timid, to be more ecumenical, to recognize its racism, to risk all for a just cause. He had little patience with how long it took the church to move on things that were important to him. A quick story. I don't remember which general council, but it was early on. It was the first one I attended with you. It was the highest body, decision-making body in the church. And we were up at a press table right in line with the moderator, the general secretary, and the legal reps. And some daffy decision went through, and Hugh just threw his pen up in the air, and with a few choice words at the same time. And I remember just being totally shocked, and looked over, I'm pretty sure it was Lois Wilson up on the stage, and nobody said much about it, and he seemed to get away with it. I'm sure I would have done that. But gradually, over the years, the press table was moved from that position back, and by the time I left, it was way in the back and in the bleachers. I don't know if that's a legacy from you, but it just found it convenient. Hugh regularly we said we believed. Not everyone enjoyed hearing that. We got a few nasty letters. We got more than a few canceled subscriptions. But on good days, when the mix was right, Hugh McCullum brought us news we didn't want to hear, convinced us we were implicated, and somehow made us believe that we could do something about the injustice he found. He was my friend and my mentor, a gifted, complicated man. And I'm going to miss those lunches where we always lingered, shaking our heads over the bleakness of national politics, violence around the world, the fatigue of the church, until our server came by for maybe the third time and we'd have to laugh about our despair talk, and we'd head out into the sunshine. Hope is in the struggle. Hugh taught me that. He knew a lot about struggle, and I think a lot about hope.
When Rebecca asked me if I had any photos of Hugh from the 1980s, I said, well, I have a few, but I have a lot of pictures of places and events, but hardly any with Hugh in it. So I phoned some other people. They said, no, that's the same for me. I traveled with him to communities of resistance in Guatemala. I went to barrios in various places in El Salvador. I went with him to military. I went to grave sites. I went everywhere, but I hardly have any photos of him. But I do have a lot of memories that are etched in my mind and heart. And so I feel privileged to be here to talk about Hugh when we traveled together in the 1980s in Central America. My name is Wes Gonsen. And I remember once when he was in Haiti, he was being pursued by the Tonton coup, and a woman said, through here. So he goes racing through there like, you know, Jason Bourne. He knocked over a couple of chairs out the back door, and he leapt over a 6-foot high fence. So I said to him, pardon? He said, well, I said, if I had a photo of that, I could sell it on eBay. He said, well, maybe it was a scramble, would be a better word. I said, what were you doing there anyhow? He said, well, I went there to get the story. I went to talk to the poor. I went to listen to what they had to say. I wanted to know if they knew what it meant, the churches on the side of the poor. And then he said, well, I'm not too sure about all that, actually. I feel like a tourist here to their pain. I feel like a bystander to their suffering. And I don't know I have any right to be speaking on their behalf. And then we were at the World Council of Churches Assembly in Vancouver, and he and old Amos were sitting on the side there, the two of them talking away, and Amos said to him, I take no delight in these solemn assemblies. What about you, Hugh? He said, yeah, that's pretty good, eh? Pretty true for all of us. But then there was a woman there, Julia Escobar, who was a poet from Guatemala. And she said, why is it that no one is talking about the crucifixion of the people of Guatemala? How come no one is talking about the injustices, the massacres, the slaughters? What's happening to our people and no one seems to hear? If a Mayan woman fell in the forest, no one would hear. And then she said, I'd like to ask you journalists who are here, if you would come and be the voice of those who have no voice.